Jai Hind and welcome to Dev Talks. As you all can see, I have with me Colonel Ajay Singh, a military historian, a writer, and a scholar. Today we're going to talk about something which is brewing a new Cold War again in Europe. The Russian so-called invasion which is coming up into Ukraine. The world is crying foul towards Russia. The Russians are crying foul towards the West. What is the exact story? Who's at fault? And that is something that we need to understand, because what is being portrayed to us today may not be the entire reality. Secondly, what is being portrayed to us may not tell you what are the consequences of the reality that is establishing today in Europe. Thank you, sir, for joining me to take us through this very dangerous situation, if I may say, not as a military conflict sort of a thing, but as a precursor to the change of the world geopolitics.
Thank you, Aadi. As always, it's a huge pleasure being with you. And I'm looking forward to your probing questions, which always test me like none others.
Thank you, sir.
A fascinating subject, which has got a greater impact and a greater resonance onto India than most of us imagine. I'm really happy you brought this out.
Absolutely. So, the tensions between Russia and Ukraine seem very weird. Let me just say that to the outset, because Ukraine was part of the erstwhile Soviet Union. If you look at their armed forces, funny thing is they fly the same Sukhois as the Russians. They fly the same MiGs as the Russians. They fly the same Antonovs as the Russians. The Russians buy their Antonov spares from Ukraine. They buy bread, wheat from Ukraine. So, it's a little difficult to understand the difference between Russia and Ukraine pre-2014, before the so-called annexation of Crimea. This particular crisis has been brewing for a while, and there's a little bit of a history to it. Why don't you take us through, so that we build a ground to this discussion as to what the issue is exactly.
Okay. Like you very correctly brought out, Russia and Ukraine were part of the same Soviet Union. And you look at the Russian press, look at the Russian television news. There's no animosity between the Russians and the Ukrainian people. In fact, none of them are in favor of war with each other. You will be surprised that the Ukrainian press is actually saying that USA is provoking a war with Russia when nobody wants it. And so is the Russians saying the same thing. But if you take a look at it, what is happening today on ground is Russia has got 1 lakh troops around its western border with Ukraine, right? Another 2 battle groups, around 20,000 more, have been deployed in Belarus, that is to the north of Ukraine. Speaking as a pure military man and analyzing the pure military threat, what it implies is that you've got 2 prongs which can move inside into Ukraine and perhaps reach all the way to Kyiv if they so desire. But this is why has the situation reached this state? You take a look at it, this has its roots way back in 2014 when Russia seized the Crimea, which they felt was part. They said the entire Donbas region in the east of Ukraine, it's all Russian speaking. They have the same ethnicity as the Russians. So to encourage them, in fact, they've been encouraging them since 2014 onwards. Russia took the Crimea. They are encouraging the separatism for the past 7 years now. And the world has forgotten the war, but about 18,000 casualties have taken place between the Ukrainian separatists, sponsored by the Russians, and perhaps with the active help as well, and the Ukrainian forces. Now, there was also a ceasefire in 2018. When we thought things were going to fall, things dissipated. Largely because of Ukraine seeking membership of NATO and NATO agreeing to take it into its fold. They're not given it formally as yet, but they've expressed that they can join out there. That is when Russia has hardened its stance, in which it says that Ukraine cannot become a member of NATO because it will bring it too close to it. And to add muscle to its weight, if I may put it this way, they began amassing its troops onto the borders, putting them in a position to kind of say, these are the demands, and we're going to back it up with a big stick. That's what they're doing right now.
Plain and simple military coercion, putting pressure with arms.
Absolutely.
I mean,
Let me tell you a story. One of the reasons, like they say in 1938, like they said, the Russia, they amassed their troops out there just so that they could invade. They were looking for an excuse to invade. In 1938, Hitler had amassed his troops at Czechoslovakia, just prior to the annexation of Sudetenland. Now, what are the report? There was an exchange in punch. They said, one of the reporters asked Chamberlain asking Hitler, why have you amassed so many troops on the Czech border? So he replies, in case of any provocation. And they say, but what if there is no provocation? And he replies and says, how can there not be with so many troops? I think that had an eerie parallel today.
Absolutely. And, one of the things that one must understand, although NATO projects itself to be the good guys, but they've kind of gone ahead and broken certain promises that they made to the Russians back in the day, especially when the breakup of the Soviet Union happened. I'd like you to kind of take us through those promises, just to help us get a background, and also to the factor that, is it true that the Russians at one time asked to be a member of the NATO itself?
Thanks, Aadi. You're bringing out some fascinating aspects which most of the press don't deal with. And today, if you take a look at it, what are the reasons? Like I said, what are the reasons for what are Putin's demands? What does he want? Ukraine and Georgia not to join NATO. NATO to pull back its forces from the Baltic states and Lithuania, which they have gone right now. Remove all offensive weaponry from their areas in Eastern Europe. You take a look at it, this demand is not very far-fetched. Now, in 1993, when the Soviet Union disintegrated, you correctly brought out Russia wanted to become part of NATO. They said the Warsaw Pact has dissolved. We are part of the European sphere. They want to be part of us. The NATO and US kept them at bay. But Yeltsin had extracted a promise in which it said that NATO would not expand further eastward. Today, from the time of this breakup of the Soviet Union to now, in the past 20 odd years, NATO had expanded 1,000 kilometers eastwards. It was the German frontier. Today, it has reached the Russian frontier. It's taken over all the Eastern European states, the Baltics, Lithuania, Poland, all these parts of their area of influence. NATO is positioned in 5 nations bordering Russia. If Ukraine and Georgia, their largest neighbors, fall into the fold, as Putin says, they have now left us, we have nowhere further we can go behind. And it is not a situation which we can accept. A missile placed on Ukraine can hit Moscow in 4 minutes. They also remember the fact that in the volatile days of the Trump administration, even the arms control treaties were being almost discarded. Fortunately, good sense has prevailed. But these are the events which have prompted the Russian reaction. And the other thing we must remember in mind is, it is that spirit of hyper-nationalism which is taking on not just Russia. I would say it's taking on most of the world, including India. It may be good. I would say it is good. Right? There is no greater calling, there is no greater ideal than your own nation. But as Putin has put it across, he was a die-hard Soviet. You remember, you're the head of the KGB in those days. And he calls the breakup of the Soviet Union as the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 21st century. When he is seeking to reassert Russian influence along the lines of the erstwhile Soviet Union. And when you see that erosion which has taken place, I view this as a kind of a pushback towards it. Now you take a look at it. Now, this Admiral Schonberg, the chief of the German Navy, when he was in Delhi, he voiced exactly the same sentiment. He was sacked for it, for his political views. But if you analyze it both objectively as a military man and even as a geopolitical thinker, there was a lot of merit in what he had said.
Yeah. It's a big nation, sir, with a big army, with a big, setup, and a very proud nation. Don't finger them. I mean, it's I'm sorry for the very crass explanation. Just let them be. And I think Putin is more interested in developing his own self, beating the foreign reserves issues that he has today. He's got a huge problem in terms of his foreign exchange availability. He's got a huge problem in terms of his economy. I don't think he's be interested in doing anything else, and neither can he afford what he's doing right now. So it's not something that he is doing it with a happy heart. And
Absolutely.
Anybody with a bit of an economic sense can actually look up the figures of the Russians that they've put out into the world and realize that they can't afford it. One of the biggest things that the US has done is brought about a certain, uncertainty. I'm sorry for kind of combining the two words, but the response of the NATO has shown the biggest crack ever in terms of putting out a response towards the Russians. And, well, you can't blame Putin for taking advantage on that. I think if the response came towards India in any case and scenario, sometimes we would also do the same thing. It's not something that you can let go. When somebody is bending down in front of you, well, fair enough. My point is very, very simple, sir. How do you gauge the response that the NATO has given in terms of its crisis management tactic, or whatever you may want to put it across?
Aadi, you answered your own question when you said we are seeing such a fractured response. Now you take a look at the signals emanating from in one breath they say, we will stand by Ukraine. We will not allow Russia to invade. We will punish you with sanctions like no other, etc., etc. If you take a look at the same time, there are signals emanating. No, but Ukraine is not yet a member of NATO. There is no local standee to stand. If you take a look at and nation is saying that. So at the moment we have no local standee to do anything in case things get out of control. So what have they done so far? It is like, USA sent $200 billion of military aid to Ukraine. Now they sent about 1,000 odd anti-tank launchers and things like this. USA talks of moving 5,000 additional troops to Europe. But so far, there has only been sanctions like you have never seen before. Right? Now, what are the sanctions? You take a look at it. But, these sanctions can hurt.
Yeah.
Let's not all, one is they exclude Russia from the SWIFT system of European banking, which will hurt badly. The other is a doublet sanction. They say they're going to cut off its Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline to Germany and Europe. That is where Russia gets so much of its revenues from, gas and oil. But remember one thing. Now, Germany is saying, but we need the gas. We want cheap Russian gas. So are the other European nations saying, you can't just say, we are going to cut off your gas because they require as much as the Russians need to export them. So even these sanctions are not being unanimously agreed by all the NATO members. So I would say at the moment they're talking, I would say it is... they are putting up a unified stance. If they're posturing, you invade and we are going to put up a united front. It's like Russia is posturing. You don't agree to my demands, I invade. What I'm seeing at this point is very intensive posturing going on by both sides, with neither side wanting a war.
I think that's the funniest part of it. And Ukrainians are standing in the middle saying, what the hell, man? Can you guys let us be? Because, it's going to affect daily life in that entire country. They've just become a pawn in the entire game. I mean, uh, they can't back down because it will give an invitation for the Russians to even move further. They can't stand
Yes.
up because they don't have the capacity to do that, and there's no backing at the back, and so it's going to be a tough call. Let me ask you a point blank question, sir. Do you think these guys will actually invade?
A point blank answer, no. They will not. I do not think Russia invade. And I'm going to give the military options why I feel this way. What do you, okay, let me also clarify. When I say invade, I don't mean that classical pincer invasions of 1939. No, you won't have those two panzer groups moving from eastern Ukraine and Belarus and converging onto Kiev. No, that will not be done. Firstly, it will be too expensive, and that invasion will unify the NATO nations and USA.
True.
So Russia would not. That'll unify them. So he will not do that. Instead, what is he going to do is he could, should he want to even launch maybe a military incursion, a likely objective, say maybe there are three, they can establish a land bridge up to the Crimea, which they've already annexed in any case. It's connected now through the Sea of Azov. They have a small incursion in the Donbass region, which reaches up to there. Now, the other thing is they can keep on encouraging Russian separatists in Donetsk, in Luhansk, and then, along with the Spetsnaz, of course, participating perhaps in civil clothes or whatever, and then declared them as independent states like they did with Abkhazia and South Ossetia in Georgia. Remember, in 2008. That means all of the Crimea is de facto part of Russia. It is their way of punishing them. Now, you take these are there are other actions. You have pinprick actions along the border. The classical Soviet tactics of salami slicing. Which slice of that salami is going to be the provocation? They have moved into a village. They've come onto a district out here. No, we don't know whether they are the Russian troops or whether they are the separatists. Which of the salami slice is the West going to react to?
The little green men.
Yeah, the classical Soviet tactics. And let's not forget, Putin, the classical Soviet man.
Yeah.
This is what they would do. Just raise the bar. Now, there is one more option. They can go in for regime change. The present regime is hard against the Soviets. But now the opposing party, the Nazi party, is a pro-Russian party. I would say it is more, I wouldn't call pro, I said more inclined towards Russia. So they create so much uncertainty. They create so much turmoil within Ukraine that you have a political changeover.
Yeah.
And then you have a political party which is now more favorably inclined to our demands, with your pinprick slicing, with your political aim, with your economical blackmail and things like this. You have a classical hybrid war situation in which you have attained your aims without actual fighting.
I'm sure the Chinese are watching, sir.
You can bet they are watching with both eyes wide open.
Yeah, and that's something that I want to talk about the next is because Biden, for all all his effort, has just been able to start focusing on towards China and the Southeast Asian region, Indo-Pacific, and of course after the debacle in Afghanistan, I think all of these guys would be wanting to see how deep is America left. Is it the same way as Afghanistan, or is going to be a little different? So I'm sure the test of the reaction is taking place. Having said that, these whole issues which are coming up with the Russians and the West is pushing Putin and Xi together, although very unlikely allies, very not very friendly with each other, as a matter of fact, but they project an image of being the best of friends and so on and so forth. How does the now resurging predominance of Russia as an adversary affect the entire threat perception that was coming out of China and USA? As a matter of fact, they are the leader of NATO and stuff like that, the world's policeman. their effort being split between both these regions?
The greatest danger, the way one views it now, is the impact it is going to have on Chinese actions.
Yeah. Mm.
You see, the US and even the European Union, the European nations were weird. They had waking up to the fact that the threat lies in the Indo-Pacific. That never they were articulating it in no uncertain terms that China is the major threat. We have to close ranks to counter it. They could afford to do so because that theater was dormant. Now, suddenly, the focus shifts back towards Europe. So, will he again be, I would say, would he again be encouraged to try his same actions, which has been dormant for the past 2 years, if you take a look at it, in the China Seas and other places, Ladakh, Arunachal Pradesh?
Taiwan.
That is a very strong thing. The other thing is now, there was a lot of talk of getting Russia into weaning Russia away from Chinese influence, because like you brought out, there are divisions between the two of them. There are still divisions. Russia is still a weaker partner, but now will Russia move towards the Chinese camp completely? And if it does so, what do you take a look at it? You may actually see the start of a new world order emerging. If these things go out of control, yeah, you could see that, in which you have got an axis of Russia, China, Pakistan, Iran, North Korea, versus USA, Europe, India. We are going to be in the forefront in the Asian theater. And that kind of a world order is not very good, because we are going to be sandwiched in between. And we will be in the front lines. So this is not, in my mind, I very often, like, I'm an historian, so I like to look back on the events of history. You take a look at the events of 1938, when the Axis bloc was being formed. Germany, the dominant partner, Japan, the partner in the Pacific, in the Indo-Pacific, with Italy and the other minor allies with them. Today, we have the same parallel, same set of events. Only difference being, it is China that is the dominant partner, and Germany, which is the subsidiary partner. But if 1938 is being played out now virtually, if the events follow the action of 1938 and escalate into Europe and beyond all proportion in Japan, as a historian, I really hope that this cycle of history does not come true.
It's going to be a scary piece of history. I mean, looking back, I'm sure a lot of people would be not very happy reading about it. One of the things that I want to talk to you about is the response that the Americans have been able to give, has been confused at best. And you also brought it out pretty easily. They say one thing, do another. It's just been up and down. It is a dangerous situation. There's no question. Now, there are two factors to it. If you look at the American camp and if you look at the other side, America also can't afford a war right now. They've got high rates of inflation, huge problems domestically. They've got issues with their allies, and their efforts are getting split up. If you look at the other camp, they say it's going to be Putin's weapons and men fighting on the Chinese money. Putin's weapons and men, very good, fair enough. They don't have that kind of an army that they used to have before. And the Chinese don't have the economy to support it today. So it's basically a no-win situation for either one of them. So I'd like you to kind of keep these two things in mind and tell me, what do you see as an outcome? Who's going to blink first?
Yeah, you put who's going to blink first? That's just like I brought out. Remember, neither side wants a war. Neither Russia, nor does the NATO or USA.
Yeah.
It is not in their interest. They are playing a game of I dare to see which side is going to blink first. Now, Again, speaking militarily, look at the window for an invasion. It lies between now and we got a month more to go. In March, the snow is going to start melting in Europe. So you can't move through the tracks and all that. No, that like this is the invasion. If it has to come, it's going to come maybe sometime the earliest by end Feb.
Campaign season.
Otherwise, in the spring thaw, there'll be no movement, right? So this is the time when things are going to follow. But like neither side wants a war. So how do I see? You ask me, how do I see it panning out? Well, they are going to. Ukraine's membership of NATO will be stalled. Now, Russia wants it in writing. They will not give it in writing, but perhaps back channel diplomacy will convey to them, okay, yeah, calm down. We don't want them in our camp. You relax. You know, as for starters, that will happen around it. Now, assuming, look at this is a very catch-22 situation. Putin gets his demands in whatever manner. He doesn't get his sanctions. Those gas pipelines continue flowing. Everything, his economy gets starts to move around as well, and it's a huge political triumph for it. Will this success of getting his demands done lead to further demands? Will a back down of the US in this situation incite China into making a similar demand with Taiwan, knowing that the limit of US power is sanctions like none other you ever seen? You see, this game is I'm viewing it as a huge psychological game played out between nations. But I am drawing that same parallel of 38 to now. When they back down to one demand, it led to the other. Had they not backed down, it may have led to a further chain of events. So, the developments now, you have to actually have honestly, the situation for this is understand the logic of Putin's demands, accept it gracefully, maybe not openly and not overtly, all right? And wean them back into the European fold. In the larger scheme of things, the world needs Russia on our side. Let's face it, the global enemy is China. Their actions, their predatory actions in every respect, militarily, politically, economically, every way. That we are striving to strike a balance of power. If Russia is weaned over to the European camp, the Western camp, let me put it in this particular manner, then the balance of power will shift to a more stable world order in future.
That's what we're looking at, because Chinese are not going to back down. Russians, at the end of it, you can talk to them and they can be trusted to a large extent. And that's something that the world also knows. It's not, they've been doing business with the Russians for the past, since the end of the Second World War. Like it or not, the Russians have never backstabbed the West in the ways that it has happened from the other side.
Them?
Yeah, there's
take a look at, they were the best of allies in the Second World War. I mean, we know it. The Soviet Union won the Second World War.
Yeah.
And even then, it was promises made by the West to the Soviet Union which did not materialize, which continued.
Yeah, of course. And it's built up into the world order that is there today. And that's something which is very interesting. So India finds itself into a very, very, funny position. Many in India were not very happy when India abstained from the vote in the United Nations, and also said that de-escalation and talks are the only thing. I think that's a very wise thing to do. That's my opinion, because we've got interest in both the camps. We also have interest in Ukraine as well. So, I mean, it's a three-way sort of a story for us. We have many would wonder what are India's interest in Ukraine. Well, the North-South transport corridor. You've got, a lot of exchange students that go there. You've got a lot of oil and stuff like that coming from there. Spare parts for our aircraft come from Ukraine to a large extent. So India's got a lot of investment, as per se, into this entire fight. India's clout in the world today is not that much to solve this entire issue. Fair enough. But what do we do?
Okay. See, today we are in a very delicate situation. If you take a look at it, diplomacy is always walking a tight wire. And we've been doing it very nice. We've got very good relations with Russia, very good relationship with USA, very good relations with Europe, and even the relation with China have been largely well managed.
Yeah.
Now, this is one event which is going to really test us. We've abstained from the vote, which took place yesterday. And I think it's a very sensible thing to do. Why should we be drawn into any camp whatsoever? But for us, we will view the following. Firstly, is like I said, the impact on the Indo-Pacific. The focus shifting to the Indo-Pacific was in our favor. Now, with it shifting back to Europe, it's going to divert attention on actions out here. Secondly, now, remember, it's not that it's Russia. If we are forced to take sides, assuming they push us to where we have to make a statement, if we do, I would say antagonize Russia, but if you have to, we seem to be leaning towards the Western viewpoint. Russia would become more beholden to China. It's the only nation which is standing by it completely. So, should there be a confrontation with India and China, will we have the same degree of Russian support, political, weapons, in every other respect that we were accustomed to? That may be one thing. Also, look at this balance between USA and Russia. Now, USA is all set to impose CATSA sanctions against India for purchase of the Russian S-400 missile system. We did that. They were also talking about giving us a waiver. Now, suddenly that may also be affected. The waiver doesn't come, so Indo-US relationship takes a nosedive. There are so many things which are going to be coming about in this balance of relations with all three of them. The other thing is, you must remember, look at the Chinese card. Will China be tempted to do the same kind of flexing of nationalistic muscle, especially now that the Western reaction is pushed to Europe? Remember, they attacked India in 1962 when the West was involved in the 92 Cuban crisis.
Cuban Missile Crisis, yes, sir.
Yes. So for us, though it is happening far away, and a lot of the impact and actions are behind the scenes, but they're going to be affecting India directly, and we have to walk a delicate line on this.
Oh, absolutely. And as a matter of fact, I think stability of this entire region would depend on India. If anything does go up in that theater, it's going to be quite a tough task, and everything is interlinked today. They might not do anything with India, but they might open up a front with Taiwan. If it opens up a front with Taiwan, it automatically opens a front because of their understanding with the Japanese, and then again the US gets involved. So it's a very dangerous sort of a situation, not something that one can brush over. Having said that, I agree with you that nobody wants a war. None of these guys are looking at actually pushing forward. Initially, the Russian deployment were bang in the open. If they had come for an invasion, I don't think they would have shown their deployment bang. Today also they're putting their deployments. There's media going in there and talking to the Russian soldiers and the commanders and stuff like that. If there was an invasion planned, I don't think the Russians would have let that particular thing happen. So there's also those signals that, listen, let's figure this out.
Yes.
But the arrogance of the West and the probably the broken scenario as he brought about with Germany and France not kind of coming on board in terms of NATO may create a little bit of trouble in sorting out the situation. But so my final question, do you think this is going to get over in some time, or is it going to drag on and on and on?
See, there would be some kind of behind the scenes solution which would be reached. But don't expect a complete full stop to it. No.
Yeah.
You see, Russia will continue with the activity in Ukraine. And the way I look at it, these kind of actions to build up pressure against the Ukrainian government will continue.
Hybrid.
So there will not be an outright war. Things will gradually ease off, but the little pinpricks will continue. And will continue. It will, take a look at it. Since 2014, it's been going on till now. Till it finally slips out of the back pages, till finally slips out of the front pages. And, they gradually attain the aims through small economic and political pinpricks, which perhaps may culminate in regime change at a later juncture. That could be their long-term plan.
True, sir. I'm sure there's a lot of backroom diplomacy that is taking place, and I hope it is for the good. It's not something that is going to be very, very good for the world, especially a post-pandemic world or a during-end pandemic world. I kind of want to find the right word for that. During the end of the pandemic world, where people are trying to recover out of everything. And we in India look at it very simply. It's going to be a huge economic loss more than anything else. Diplomatically, it's going to be a tough stand to take. Afghanistan, the entire focus towards terrorism is going to get brushed away. The Chinese focus would get sidelined to a large extent. And I'd like to say this, and I don't know if you agree with me, China doesn't have the stomach to fight a war or to actually support the Russians in fighting a war. Look at their own systems. They're in bad shape right now. Their economy is down. The virus is hitting them. It's an embarrassment in terms of the Olympics. They're going to lose billions and billions of dollars because they've not been able to sell any tickets and stuff like that. It's not a very simple scenario. Sir, thank you so much. I think you brought about a lot of background history, which many in the media today miss out in explaining while they're discussing the Ukraine crisis. It's always started from the factor that the Russian invaded Crimea, and the Russians are the bad boys. I think there was a bit of a chaos with the Hindu newspaper as well yesterday when they put about the invasion of Crimea, and the Russian embassy in Delhi put out a very clear tweet. Please give us the details of the so-called invasion. And the Hindu had to actually retract and delete that tweet. So there's a lot of backdoor and hybrid sort of an action which is taking place. And if we can see an instance within India, you can imagine what's happening over there as well. Cyber attacks, hacking, so on and so forth.
Oh, yes, that's going on. In fact, I'm very happy about cyber attacks, because one of the first things that happened, you see, like Russia is very strong in the cyber domain.
Yes.
And the first thing that happened once the talks failed was that the government and military sites were hit by a wave of cyber attacks, which defaced the sites. Now, watch out, we are coming. This is only the first step. So, obviously, they have made their inroads, they prepared the grounds, and now they're posturing and stating that this is what our capabilities are. Would you like us to take it to the limits? And this kind of posturing, let us hope it stops at posturing, because very often posturing can go out of control in a manner which nobody wanted, which will be disastrous for all of us, especially India, though we are nowhere in the front line at this stage. Yeah,
one bullet in the wrong place. That's all it takes. So once again, thank you so much for joining me for this very interesting discussion on Ukraine and the impact on the world as well as India. It's a dangerous situation. Let's hope for that peace and cooler heads prevail and this crisis gets resolved. Till next time, sir, for another subject, another day. Jai Hind.
Thank you, Aadi. A pleasure being with you, like it always is. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.